Computing technology has come a long way from the very first electronic machines. In fact, since the 1940s, as the hardware has shrunk, computer processing power has doubled roughly every 2 years, an observation that has become known as Moore's Law.
But with current technology, it may be difficult to maintain that pace of development. And that's why such fields as molecular computing are exciting tech heads like our own Dr. Karl.
You had the first ENIAC, one of the earliest computers, there are a few of them.
This is back in the 40s, is it?
Back in 1947. And every year it just got faster and quicker. And 20 years later, in 1965, Gordon Moore, who set up Intel, you know, the big company, he realised that the packing density of the components, the transistors, and their speed was doubling every 15, 18 months. And we've been doing it from 47 to 65 and up to the present. And so we've been heading down this pathway of the big shrink, or less is more. Get it? The pun on more. Just threw that in.
Very good. OK, so, but there must reach a point where it can only shrink so far.
I actually read that in the latest issue of Aviation Week and Space Technology, Moore's Law, no more. And they're talking about shrinking the transistors smaller and smaller, closer and closer. They're saying in 10, 15 years, Moore's Law's no more.
Is that because of the physical nature of the technology they're using, i.e. silicon-based computer chips, for instance? They have a limit, surely.
Exactly correctly, because the silicon is a semiconductor. And that means it sort of carries electricity and sort of insulates. And when the things get too close together, they don't insulate anymore. And suddenly the electrons, instead of being under your control, they're just sort of going wherever they feel like. And so that will cause the major problem. And that's why they're heading for this new thing called neural networks. They're actually trying, at last, to mimic the human brain. Now, if I say the word to you, tabby, and then immediately calico, you think, oh, Karl's talking about cats. The amount of computer power a computer has to do is enormous to do that. And now we're trying to mimic what's happening in the brain, where you have one nerve talking to thousands. We're trying to make the first brain chips.
OK, before we get to that point, though, I mean, Moore's Law says, say by the year 2050, computers would have the storage capacity of 200,000 human brains. Yet you're saying even with that capacity, it's not up to scratch as far as how a human brain works.
At the moment, it's not. Moore's Law has taken us an amazing distance so far. If you think back to the first computers, the ENIACs, filled 3 air-conditioned rooms, weighed 30 tonnes, used up enough electricity to run a small village. Now compare that to the smartphone, which we all carry.
OK, something you can hold in your hand, right, compared with something that fills a huge room.
Yeah, well, the amount, in terms of volume, you've been to Cape Canaveral and seen the Vertical Assembly Building, right? That's the world's largest single-storey building. And you go in and you look up and you look up and you keep on looking up 50 stories and rain clouds form inside, right? OK, you'd need 150 of those buildings. That's the volume. The weight of computing power.
Hang on. So you're saying to equal the power of a smartphone today, if you were using an ENIAC, the very first computer,
you'd need 170 vertical assembly buildings in terms of volume, you know, towing it behind you down the street. The weight would be 2,500 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, which are the best part of 100,000 tonnes. The power output would be 500 of the biggest nuclear power stations in the world, and the cost to build one would be equal to the entire world budget for a year, $60 trillion. In other words, if the world did nothing, no feeding people, no making vaccines, nothing, just made, you could make one smartphone. And so Moore's Law has taken us into massive capabilities.
It's quite incredible, isn't it? That's some 60, 70 years ago, how far we've come. Let's then throw forward another 50, 60 years. What sort of computing we're going to have? We're not talking about basic or sort of physical computers with silicon, for instance. We're talking about molecular electronics.
Yes.
A DNA computer, for instance.
Yeah, we've got DNA computers coming down the line. We've got molecules where instead of having millions of atoms, you've just got 20 or so being a computer chip.
And we haven't even got to the point where you can actually plug your computer into your brain.
Well, that's where we're going next.
And assist your intelligence, basically.
About a year ago, in a Scientific American, there was an article about how we can make the electricity of a nerve to the electricity of a wire. So the phone in the future will be something smaller than a grain of sand, buried next to a nerve, say in your arm. And then when you think, I want to ring Carl, you won't actually hold the arm up to your head and you won't dial anything, you'll just think, ring Carl. And then one part of it will talk to the telephone tower via electromagnetic radiation, and the battery power will be the juices in your body, and then it'll talk to your nerve and you just start having a conversation with in your head, so you won't have to act like a mad person talking to yourself as you walk down the street. The disadvantage, what if you get a pocket call? In the middle of, say, the height of passion, you start thinking of me. Or accidentally it comes in Dr. Carl. I know that's a bizarre thought, but you see the potentiality for
you
problem.
You better be careful. You're going to do yourself out of a job, because I have one of those plugged into my brain. I'll be telling you about all of this.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're heading into a crazy world. We already have the first generation that has no privacy. And so with Moore's Law, we're going to find the world changing once again.
Dr. Karl, thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andrew.